Two Wood for a Wheat is a board game podcast. We review and criticize board games, diving deep into the strategies and mechanisms that make them great or make them forgettable.
Welcome to Two Wood for a Wheat. I'm Tony Faber.
And I'm Pat Flannery. On today's episode, we will be reviewing Forest Shuffle, the brand new small box game by Kosh, all about playing out animals into your forest, into your trees, having those animals together to give you points and synergies that will absolutely blow your mind. You have no idea.
And then we hope to flow into an esoteric discussion about the cost of cards and card costing formulas in card games.
Yep. Cost curves in card games.
Kosh. I love how it's just one name, Kosh, right?
Kosh.
Like Cher or Prince. The designer formerly known as Kosh. By the way, the designer I didn't realize had done that game. Is it FYFE? F-Y-F-E?
Fife?
F-E? Fife? FYFE?
I like calling it Fife. I don't know. Yep, that's the one that I was saying is a lot like Calico, in fact, as far as its diversity of scoring mechanisms and how every time that you lay out a token, it interacts with 3 or 4 different scoring mechanisms potentially, but it was just a little too random for its own good.
Well, spoiler alert, this is a game where everything interacts with everything else in wild and amazing ways in Forest Shuffle. But before then, Pat. Tree Wolf.
I see you, Mr. Sycamore. You know, I once got 185 points in trees, and most of those, probably 100 of those points were from my sycamores.
Yeah, it's fun. Get on the sycamore roll.
The sycamore roll. Oh.
Each sycamore being worth 1 point for every tree that you have. The sycamore is the ultimate give me more trees strategy.
Right. Oh, and every card that I play can become a tree instead? Every card is a tree now. Oh, and I have a mushroom that allows me to draw cards whenever I play a tree. Well, this game's going to go quick.
Yeah. So we are talking about Forest Shuffle here, folks, which we are reviewing. I'm excited to review. We previewed it, and we gave it a little mini review, John Gortat and I, on the GenCon Roundup episode, which already kind of gives away my view of the game. But now Pat has played the game some. And we're ready to give a more in-depth review, and we'll see if Pat agrees with me or comes in with a controversial, contrary opinion.
Am I giving myself to the woods? Am I going to go live as a forest nymph forever after with Tony and John Gortat as we spread rose garlands across our necks and frolic with the deer and get all types of different tick-borne diseases? Well, maybe. We'll see.
Before we get to that, is there any other board games you've played that you want to discuss?
I got a chance to play Nucleum on Tabletop Simulator with a couple of the folks from the Discord. Both Bill and Ryan joined for a game of Nucleum. The new game by the Italian designers Simone Luciani and David Turci. This is a game, Tony. It is set in like the 1900s. It's an alternative history where instead of running the Industrial Revolution on coal, somebody discovered Nucleum, a uranium reactor, powered all of Bavaria and led them to world domination. And, you know, it feels like kind of like Barrage had its alternative history, steampunk, flooding, you know, water resource lacking, hydropower. This feels like a looser Barrage in theme as well as mechanisms.
To be clear, this is a game which is not coming out officially until Essen in October, but it's available on Tabletop Simulator if you want to go to the effort to play it that way.
Styled off of the Tabletopia mod. And Tony, we had absolutely no technical glitches whatsoever. It was a perfect game.
That's not what the chat that I followed said along those lines.
There was one small 45-minute hiccup where all of the iconography got superimposed on top of the board with a series of several different buttons, and you couldn't manipulate anything or play the game, but that's
not a hiccup. 45 minutes is more like a coronary.
That was a short hiccup. You know, we made it through.
A short hiccup's half a second. Anyway, quibbles aside and technical glitches aside, how did you all enjoy the game?
Well, as I said, it's kind of like a looser Barrage. It's got the same necessity for tying together different parts of the game in order to make a machine and then to throw a switch and make that machine run. It's got that same sort of vibe. And then add to that the kind of coal market vibes of brass And then the technologies of a Gaia project, the very Euro-based technologies of a Gaia project, small incremental or big one-time bonuses. And you've got Nucleum. And your goal in this game is generally to generate the most electricity. That's what you're trying to do, similar to Barrage, and actually borrows a few mechanisms from Barrage. You're going to do this by using action dominoes. They're called action tiles, but they really are dominoes. And your action dominoes can go above your board, where they will be used for both actions, one action on the top, one action on the bottom. One action might be to allow you to build an urban building that could later be powered. The bottom action might allow you to build a turbine, which will increase your efficiency while you're generating power. And they can also be used, these action tiles, as railroads on the map to connect your energy supply to your energy demand, let's say. And here's where they really act as dominoes, because if the color matches what's next to it, let's say a green side of the domino matches a green city, then you get to take the action. And the thing is, using them this way, you're getting rid of them permanently from your hand. They're just railroad tiles after a line is completed, and you'll always have to buy more. So yes, you're expanding to more parts of the map, but you are getting rid of your railroad tiles, getting rid of your action tiles as railroads at the same time. So
the idea of matching a color to get an extra action sounds a lot like Underwater Cities.
Yeah, a little bit. And it's interesting because you might have somebody swoop into the half-completed rail line that you've been planning to build out, and they decide, yeah, I'm not going to match with you because I don't want you to get that extra benefit that you would have got otherwise, and screw you over in the meantime. So it feels a bit like Underwater Cities with the matching, but it's meaner too. So anyways, you connect your demand to supply, and bada bing, bada boom, electricity, right? It's that easy. Well, maybe not. Because at first you're running coal, and it's inefficient, and you got to pay for it, and it's expensive, and as you use it, it gets more expensive because there's less coal, and it also doesn't generate that much electricity. So yeah, you might power a few little measly buildings, but pretty soon you're going to want to power bigger buildings. So you got to find and hook up to a nuclear reactor, a Nucleum on the board, and then you got to connect that nuclear reactor to a uranium mine. And then you got to connect both to the building that you want to power. Okay, so you're making some bread now.
This sounds very Barrage with multiple connections required.
I told you. All the meanwhile, somebody might screw you over and interrupt your plans, but you can skip over their network. You just can't build from there anymore. But anyways, and if you want to use more than one of those uranium, you're going to need to improve the infrastructure of the power plant. So you're going to need to build turbines on that power plant. All the while, your opponents are building on the cheap or bonus-filled mines, grabbing the turbine infrastructure, laying out the tracks that block you from certain cities, and using the preset buildings on the map, using them up so that they've already been powered on, and you're losing efficiency as you're building out for your strategy, right? Additionally, all of your money and your workers and even your action tiles are running out, because like I said, you're using them to play out on the map, and you're using them to take actions. So you're going to have to end your round. And if you end your round and you've generated about the same amount of electricity as a few times previously, then the game will knock points out of your jaw for not improving your ability to generate electricity. Because the game, Tony, is actually at the end of the day, extend your round efficiency puzzle similar to Hallertau or Discordia or even Hadrian's Wall. I know, it's a surprise, but it's some of my...
Tapestry.
Or Tapestry, exactly. Those are actually some of my favorite kinds of games. Just extend out your turn for as long as possible, get all of the efficiency that it can, and make it as long as possible. And that's because all of the scoring and income potential happens during the reset turn, and it's all capped by how much that you've done on that turn before that reset. So income, it's directly tied to how many tiles that you put above your board. You could have maxed out all of the income tracks, but if you only put one tile out, you will only get the income from directly underneath that tile that's put out. Then the amount of electricity that you generated and that was used by buildings, that translates directly to this achievement track, which has these segments where you'll demarcate how many you got that round, and then you'll mark it with a milestone token, and it will become an end game multiplier. So it might be, times 6 and / 5 for every second railroad that you put on the map, right? And then you can't put 2 in the same segment, however, so you will have to take a lower segment and a lower multiplier if you try to double up. And then if you have no free ones available, Tony, you take negative points, okay?
Do you ever intentionally take a lower multiplier because you want to do that recharge, get resources a little bit early and set up for a big next round?
I did at one point decide I really want I'll take the negative points, because It comes with a worker and it comes with money and a pity worker and pity money. But I needed the penny worker and the pity money, and I had a couple of workers left, but I didn't really like my action tiles. I didn't have the ability to buy new action tiles, so yeah, I took an income round early. And I got the negative points, but it was okay because I hadn't generated that much electricity in that round anyway, so I wasn't really, stressing too much. I didn't waste that much. Because the most crushing thing about it, Tony, is your accrued energy, it goes right back to zero. So you might have any progress that you made trying to climb is totally reset in going into after the reset turn. So you may be within reach of the highest multiplier and not quite make it one round, maybe be 2 or 3 power generation away from that highest ×6 tier. Well, okay, you hit ×5, maybe try it again the next time. But in order to get that highest level, that ×5 that you hit, he probably used a bunch of your big buildings permanently, and most of your uranium and all of the coal is now too expensive. So that was probably the highest that you were going to get. That was your big turn to score that ×6, and you didn't quite make it. And so you probably will not get there next round. So shoot your shot, be as efficient and long-lasting as possible, and make it count. And that's Nucleum in a nutshell. And add to that all of the area control for connections and getting the best spots on the map. And you've got quite a game on your hands, Tony.
You sounds like you really enjoyed it.
I did, and I'm excited to play it again. And if you ever decide that you can leave behind this old man anti-technology part of yourself, maybe we can try it.
Or maybe I can even get a physical copy of the game at some point.
Someday.
Okay, cool. Anything else?
Yes, I played a game called Federation. I went over to Brian's house, and this is a game that released, I believe, in 2022, but Eagle Gryphon Games republished it here in the United States in 2023.
Isn't it a CGE game?
I don't know.
I seem to remember John, and Wolfram, who were working at the CGE booth, talking about it. Unless I'm mixing it up with something else.
Why don't you give it a search, and I'll talk about it, and you can say whether it is or isn't.
Oh, Federation. No, I'm mixing it up with a Star Trek game from CGE.
You are thinking...
This is Eagle Gryphon, you're right.
Yes, you're thinking of Starship Captains.
Is that what I'm thinking of? Anyway, the Federation. Federation, yes. Oh, I've heard good things about this game. I want to hear how it went for you.
So this is not Star Trek. This is Star Wars. And specifically, it is the Galactic Senate in the Star Wars prequels. It's a bunch of aliens from different planets on a bunch of floating platforms that are all voting and making sure to enact bills. And there's an ultra-powerful I am the Senate Palpatine special power in the expansion box. But anyways, Federation, it's a worker placement game that's all about voting, actually. So you have 2 chambers of Congress, and they're voting on different issues. And your workers, you have 4 of them, and they actually have votes on top of them, 1, 2, and 3. And you'll need these votes because you'll be placing the votes between the 2 chambers of Congress as well as across 3 different rows. So each chamber of Congress has a 3x3 grid, and each one has a unique worker placement action on it. So placing a worker there, it may let you climb the track on one of the alien planets, which might get you resources. Or it will allow you to get ships, or it will fund missions for those ships to go on. And those missions are like special bonus actions that you can take. So the game is a worker placement game, yes, but to take these various actions. But at the end of the round, it becomes an area majority game because you are going to score the votes across each row, and whoever has the most votes is going to score for that particular row multiplied by this track that you can climb up. So if you win the row, you get the points. If you don't win the row, you don't get the points. On top of that, you will also score one of the 2 chambers. Whichever one has the most votes will succeed. And it is points for having climbed a certain planet track. The other one will not score at all. So you are constantly not only considering where your action should go, but also how many votes that you'll get on both the row as well as inside of which specific chamber that you would like to win. Your workers let you take an action that gives you ships for points or resources, and they also complete for row majority, and they also complete for chamber majority. It's a lot going on. But that's only one side of these workers. The other side, flip that worker tile over, and it has a gold stamp on it. And this gold stamp gives you even more options. Now it will fund part of a project that, if fully funded, will result in endgame points for whoever's done best, like getting farthest up one planet track. And those projects that fund are at the top of each column. So you have to consider that too. Which project do I want to try to fund while I take my action? And the gold stamp may also give you resources. And the gold stamp will also open up more missions for you, which you can send ships to, which effectively get you these bonus turns, bonus actions. So one worker has the potential to impact in 6 different ways, and each time will interact with as many as 3 subsystems of the game. It is really cool, really dense thoughts. It's like you're a SQL data point with 6 different variables all interacting with it and deciding how to pinpoint yourself on this map. It's really interesting. It's incredibly competitive too. There's a lot to think about with every single action space you take, since you may really want an action, but you don't want to fund the project above it, or you really want an action, but you'd rather win the row majority. So quite a lot of systems pulling you away from your goals, pulling you in a lot of different directions, and it makes for a really thinky, difficult decision game, and that is Federation.
It brings up the fact that I'm excited to actually play next weekend with some of our Discord listeners at a local Jersey get-together, and Federation was one of the games they were considering playing, so maybe I'll give you my thoughts in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So did you really, it sounds like you enjoyed it, but it's hard to really tell.
No, I really enjoyed it. I really think it's interesting. Came in second, 2 points behind Brian, and it was an incredibly close game, and it really came down to the actions that the other players took that allowed me to, or disallowed me to take certain actions that allowed me to do as well as I did. There's a lot of interaction as far as worker placement goes. Some people take the exact worker placement spot that you'd like to take. The fact that those projects fund together is, and you're all working together to fund those projects is really interesting, because it's kind of a game of chicken of who wants to fund it and which one you do or don't, because you want to be ahead in those tracks. There's a lot going on in the game, and it's extremely competitive and very interactive.
It has very inviting art style for a dense Euro. It's cartoony, maybe a bit extreme, but sort of bright and simple.
Yes, it's stylized for sure. And the tracks could just be tracks, but instead there are these brilliant blue and gold and orange and pink planets. They're quite stylized. It's well done. It's well realized.
Excellent. Well, 2 heavy Euros for you, none for me. Anything else?
That's all I got in, except for lots of Forest Shuffle on Board Game Arena and in person.
Okay, well, let's dive right into Forest Shuffle. Forest Shuffle is a card game, a tableau building game, in which players are playing cards from their hands, drawing more cards, and playing more cards out to their tableau. And that's literally the whole game. On your turn, you're going to do one of 2 things. You're going to draw 2 cards from some combination of the common market or blind draws off the top of the deck, or you're going to play a card from your hand, which will cost you a certain amount of cards, since cards are also resources, and a card might be free, or it might cost 2 cards or 1 card to put out. And that's going to be every turn. Draw 2 cards, or play a card and pay the cost in cards. And interestingly, when you pay the cost in cards, they don't go to a discard pile or anything like that. They actually then comprise the common market. So the cards that you pay as currency then become available for other people to draw if they like. And why you're building these cards out is you're trying to score points by building the most vibrant and rich and combo-rific ecosystem in the forest. And trees are sort of the basis of the ecosystem. So when you play a tree out, you can then play other cards next to the tree. So you have certain cards that are 2-sided and have an animal, say, on the left side of the tree, on the left side of the card, and an animal on the right. And depending on what tree availability you have, you'll use one of those sides, depending on which animal you want to put out, and put it next to one of your trees. So your ability to put out animals and other things is limited by how many trees you have. There's also things you put cards that are split between the top and the bottom of the tree where they can be placed. You might have plants or grubs or berries or little toads or amphibians down on the below the tree, and you might have butterflies and birds at the top of the tree. So everything scores in a different way, and there's like hundreds of cards in this game, all with some different weird set collection thing. And it's combo-rific in that you might have a card that gives you extra points for insects, and these cards give you insects, and these cards let you draw an extra card when you put something on the bottom of your tree, which you're usually doing with your insects. And so you might build up sort of an engine, although it's not technically an engine building game. There's so many different ways you can go about trying to score this. 10 different set collection ways just you can score in your trees alone. There's a million different types of birds. There's animals. There's, sometimes you get prey and predators as part of your set collection. You might have deer, and then you're collecting wolves to that score off of that. You might have, again, collecting tons of berries and things underneath your tree. A million ways to score. The game ends when the third winter card shows up. All 3 winter cards are mixed into the bottom third of the deck. So when 2 of them have showed up, you know the end of the game is nigh. So the game can end quickly, say 2/3 of the way through the deck, or it can come on the last card in the deck. You're never quite sure. So there's some pushing your luck in how you play in that last piece of the game. There's a lot I could say about the individual cards and how they work and, what bonuses they give you. Some have tags which allow you to get a bonus action when you pay the resource of a different specific tagged type to put the card into play. Others do other special things. For instance, you have a cave. Some cards allow you to discard your hand or the common market and put them in your cave and score them 1 point to cycle your deck. When the common market exceeds, I believe it reaches 10 cards, then all those cards go to a discard pile and you start over. So yeah, there's a lot I'm looking forward to say, but why don't you jump in, Pat, since I talked about my impressions last week, and give your thoughts out of the gate here.
Sure. Forest Shuffle, it's a little game that plays quickly, but that packs a tremendous amount of tactical play.
Yeah, it's a half an hour game. I think it's fair to say once you know what you're doing.
And it's impressive. I confirmed John's intonation that it plays pretty much the same time for each player account, whether it's 2-player or 3-player. It seems to be about the same time. You just add a few more cards and you get on your way. What I will say about this game is it feels wonderful to attempt a strategy, but a couple of things may block you from achieving strategies, and such as you may be attempting to, let's say, perform a whole reptile strategy where you're just gathering lots of reptiles and helping them to play you out other animals, right? Well, okay, there's not that many reptiles in the deck, and you pull a certain number of cards, depending on player count, out of the deck at the beginning of the game, and some of those cards may be in your opponent's hands, and they may play them, and also, the game ends on 3 winter cards, and some of those cards may be beneath the 3rd winter card, and you will never see them ever inside of a game. So there's a desire to play strategically in this game because there is such a strong potential for comboing things together and getting power stacked on top of each other. For instance, if you have 5 sycamores out, okay, every tree you play out is going to be worth 5 points. And in a game where top scores are like 250, okay, that racks up pretty quickly. That's pretty impressive. You might want to do that and have an outlook to do that. But if they never come out, what are you going to do? Well, you can't just sit on your hands and wait for the sycamores. So you have to play tactically what comes out waiting for you. And actually, I think that's the biggest, most fun tension in the game is this desire to hope for a strategy and push for a strategy in the churn of the card deck and the churn of the Meadow while retaining this elasticity in your tactical play.
The first thing I want to say in response, Pat, is if you guys are averaging 250 points, you're better players than we are, because that was a score very rarely achieved, and only then in 2-player games.
2 players.
One has
2 players, yes.
Okay, yeah. I was going to say, at like a 4-player game or something, 250 would be almost inconceivable.
Well, that's an interesting thing to say, and I will say the game does play differently at different player accounts.
Yep, you can get more done at lower player counts, like many games.
And I find that in 2 players, you can much more likely play out a strategy versus as the player count goes up, you're much more likely playing tactically and having to make a strange interconnected web of benefits and bonuses. And at 2 players, you might just have like 17 trees and, maybe a bat or 2. But then at 3, 4, or 5 players, you're going to have bats and frogs and wolves and trees and all sorts of oddities. It's really going to look a lot more alive and a lot more flush because you just have to play what's in front of you at those higher player counts.
Right, and some cards are stronger or weaker at different player counts, like the chestnut trees, if you can corner the market on them in, say, a 2-player game, can just be extremely lucrative in points. Yeah. But if you're playing a 4 or 5-player game, those chestnut trees are going to be spread around to not really be able to take advantage as much of those escalating points for having large numbers of them, right?
Yeah.
But regarding what you said about your strategy, the cards may not show up. That's definitely true. But why I didn't find that to be much of a problem for me is, one is there's so many different strategies and approaches you can take. It's actually, I would say, a mistake to focus solely on one or even two strategies. You've got to have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and a plan D in this game, and then be ready for card E to show up that you play as well. You want to have alternatives that you can run with depending on what shows up. You don't want to have all your eggs in the reptile basket, right? You want to have maybe reptiles, but you're also working on these certain tree type, and then you're working on these deer over here as well. So you can kind of pivot depending on what comes your way. And I like that, the idea of having different alternatives and outs that aren't always present in a short card game.
Well, I agree with you. I do think that playing a lot of trees, as far as these strategies goes, tends to be the most consistently viable.
Perhaps at 2-player.
Well, so listen, trees, they're a third of the deck, and trees give you points inherently on them. And then you got sycamores, and you get more points for each tree that you put out, including the points on the sycamore itself. And then it also pushes the end game sooner, because every time you lay down a tree, you draw a card and put it into the meadow, which ends the game more quickly. So as I said, I have scored 185 points on trees before, but you are correct. It is weaker in 3 players since you're able to do less, and you might just not get those cards out. But I'd say as far as the strategies go, it seems like the most viable just because there's so many trees in the deck.
And also the other thing is everybody needs trees, so everybody's going to be playing some trees to be able to get out other stuff. And if in a good table, if one person's cornering all the chestnut trees, other people will start picking up chestnut trees as well as the trees that they need to put out anyway.
Well, and so that's another point, which if you are playing smart, you are playing so that you are discarding cards in a way that does not benefit your opponents. Last night, I got 3 chestnuts in a row. And my opponent said, wow, he's the friggin' chestnut king, isn't he? And for the rest of the game, I did not see a single chestnut inside of the meadow because they were actively hate drafting away chestnuts and ensuring that they would not discard them before I could, on the turn before I would be able to grab them. It was, it's smart play, not just from the perspective of what you are playing out, but also what you are discarding so that your opponents can garner a strategy. You can actively block them based off of what you don't put out.
And the really clever way to do this is to pay as currency the opponent's cards that they want in such a way that it puts it over the 10-card limit right as you pay it. So that card just gets discarded straight out of the game.
Yeah. Brian discarded 2 or 3 chestnuts last night in just such a way.
And however, you may be planning to do that, but then there keeps being very few cards in the market when it's your turn. And now these darn chestnuts that you don't need are clogging your deck, and you're not spending them as currency because you don't want to give them to Pat over there. So there's some really nice push and pull there.
Well, so that's something that I really like about the game is the hand limit. The 10 cards in your hand, that's extremely consequential. The fact that you can only get 10 cards in your hand, and you're locked into that. If you're at 9 cards, you can draw 1 more, but that's it. You don't get to draw 2 more. So whatever is in your hand at that point, you got to play something, which means you can't just churn cards.
And you can't just stockpile a bunch of good cards to play out all at once late in the game.
Right. So there's times here where you may delay into inefficiency for moments of potential efficiency later on, drawing the right cards from the meadow or the deck to color match a discard power and discard for a 1-2 punch of a turn. But if you're doing that for multiple turns and hoping, for a light colored blue that just never comes out, and then you've clogged your deck all the way to 10 hands, then you're sitting with, a full belly and no way to move. You've screwed yourself into inefficiency by trying to attempt for 1 turn of efficiency, 1 or 2 turns of efficiency.
Yeah, and I like how the game makes you improvise in those situations and say, okay, which of these cards that I was planning to save up am I actually going to pay out as resources and put my eggs in this basket and make those painful decisions. And in that way, I think I don't mean to criticize your favorite game here, but I think it plays a little bit different from Race from the Galaxy. By the way, Race from the Galaxy is a game where you may do a military strategy, and the military cards don't show up much in this game, and you lose that way. So it's kind of that kind of card draw luck in a short game is kind of I think we kind of accept it in the shorter game type. But in the other way, I think it differs. The way I think it differs from Race for the Galaxy is that in a Race for the Galaxy, if you're trying to go in 4 different directions at once, you're probably just going to lose to the dedicated player who's found a strategy and is going full board to complete it while the game's going, right? That game is a little more single focus. And in this game, you can be a little more diverse, especially in those higher player count games, to give yourself opportunities to pivot in one direction. And then if something keeps showing up, well, then you push that path. But you always keep other options open for yourself.
And I was wondering about that because I was like, the card costs here are way lower than Race for the Galaxy. Race for the Galaxy, a card might be free all the way to it might cost you 6 cards, right? And it's the same thing with the 10 card limit. You can go a little bit over, but you always have to discard down to 10. Now, in this game, you're going to be discarding 0 to 3 cards. And I was thinking, why do you, why is it such a lower number of cards that you want to discard? Why is there no one card that costs 6 cards in that deck? I wonder why. And I think it's because inside of this game, every card does something pretty cool and is going to give you some points and doesn't necessarily have to completely synergize with your given strategy. It will give you some points even if it doesn't completely give you a stacked benefit. But it's interesting because when I was looking up, 10 cards in my hand, I was like, I want 8 of these cards, and I have 2 that I'm willing to discard, and those are only kind of maybe. Like I could figure out ways to use them. And
you want to play every card. It's great.
I want to play every card, and so I have cards that are A cards, and I have cards that are B+ cards. Basically, there were hardly ever any CD or no F cards.
Well, there's some situationally weak cards. I was talking to you about butterflies, which are situationally weak, but if you have cards that give you points for insects, they become tremendously powerful. But without those, they're kind of weak.
Well, so Tina's very first game, she had several different sets of butterflies, and each butterfly gives you a few points if they are different from the butterflies that are already out, and they're cheap to play, which is nice. And they get out there, but it amounts to like 20 points for 6 cards. It's not a lot, versus a chestnut strategy. I think 6 chestnuts will give you something like 30 or 35 points. It's quite a lot more. However, Tina also got out a lot of hedgehogs, multiple hedgehogs, and they gave her 2 points for every butterfly. So she was just slinging hedgehogs left and right, hedgehog. She must have gotten like 30, 40 points off of those damn hedgehogs. It was great. So yes, situational. It's a lot of, well, I've already got the strategy going, and this card fits really well into the strategy. I'm glad that this came out, and so I'm going to play it. It's a fun game of discovery for that reason. Playing with folks last night or playing with Tina that first time, it was like, oh, wait, this card perfectly synergizes with the major thing that I'm doing and a couple of the micro things that I'm doing or minor things that I'm doing. I'm going to play this and it's going to synergize. And that feeling of discovery of something that synergizes with your engine is fairly exciting. And that buoyed me through the first couple of plays of the game. After probably 3 or 4 plays of the game, I knew the deck pretty well, and I was like, yeah, that sense of discovery is gone, and man, I wish that there was more different card types. I only wanted more animals to come out and more different cards types. But then I played a few more times, and then came the moments of really like, wait, all of these cards are good, all of them are viable, and it's not necessarily about the discovery anymore. It's about the interrelationship between the cards and my growing strategy overall, instead of one single like card or a wolf or tree or bear strategy that I'm going for.
The best card.
Right.
Trying to keep everything viable is maybe a reason why you don't have these 6 cost cards, like you were saying. Also, I think if some cards had to pay 6 cards for them, it would be too easy to turn over the market. And you want that to actually be kind of challenging to do. So it is kind of challenging to get rid of cards you don't want your opponents to get.
Yeah. I also think that they'd probably be too powerful and outside of the power curve of the game.
Yeah.
At 6 points.
I think so. And as you play on in this game, the discovery becomes not, ooh, look at this cool card, although there's enough cards in the deck that it does feel like a really diverse, rich forest. But the discoveries are these little finesses that you can do, these little clever plays. Like when you realize that in that situation where you have to get rid of cards that you don't want to get rid of because you want everything in your hand, but then you realize your opponent doesn't want a couple of the cards in your hand and is super unlikely to take them. So you play them as currency in hopes they'll come back, and then you can pick them up the next round, right? And you're pretty sure your opponent doesn't like that. And the fact that you're paying for them as currency, you're sort of trying to bluff your opponent and saying, see, I don't really need those cards at all. They're not important to me, but they are. You're just playing those to pay for them because you don't think your opponent will pick them up. So
or how about this?
Yeah.
I'll play an oak I'm going to discard these 2 brown cards. I don't really need those. Psych, I get an extra turn, and I'm going to take them right back into my hand.
Right. Another great example. There are all these little clever plays, some based on the bonuses, you get when you play the cards of the right color, but others just based on playing your opponents or finding little efficiencies in how you get cards out and how cards work together.
Yeah, so last night, within about 2 turns, I entirely shifted my strategy to an entirely 2 new groups of animal types. I'd been setting out hares over and over again, and hares you can just stack on top of each other. It's great. And
you don't. As many hares as you want can fit in a tree.
It's nice, but they're worth like nothing. But if you put out foxes, then every time you play a fox, you get to draw cards for every hare that's already out there, and they also score points for the hares at the end of the game. Now, 2/3 of the way through the game, no foxes have come out, and I've got a bunch of hares, so I've lost a lot of efficiency. And in that moment, I pivoted. I had buttressed with what I got, and I played reptiles, 2 reptile cards. Each one automatically played a wolf, and then I played a deer, which allowed me to play another deer, which scored for my wolves. And I had, within just a couple of turns, completely reset my board, auto-playing different cards to auto-play other cards, and I was back in business.
Cool. I love that sense of pivoting because I think it's a richer game that has a lot of pivoting rather than deciding on the first turn what you're going to do and just following that strategy to the end. And there may be games where you start with one strategy and the cards just keep coming for it, so you stick with it. I mean, that will happen sometimes too, but that's not like every game.
Right. I've had plenty of games where I've attempted a tree strategy and stuck so solidly to it that I've lost the game because the sycamores just haven't come out. That's definitely possible. So it's best to be flexible.
If you had told me a month ago, Pat, that my favorite game that I played at GenCon would be another set collection card game based on populating the forest, I would have thought Living Forest, I would have thought Meadow, I would have thought Ecosystem, all these games that we've had, and I would have been skeptical. But this game really keeps things vibrant. And for me, this is the game, the tableau builder that I want to play. And and it's strange that I'm comparing it to much bigger games like Ark Nova, Terraforming Mars, Earth, games, and some of those you might like better, but for me, I can tolerate the card draw luck much better in the shorter time frame, and I feel like the game packs so many decisions in a short time rather than spreading them out over a long game time that I really like it. I feel like my serotonin rush, my endorphins are constantly going off because there's constantly cool cards that I'm playing out, constant tough decisions that I'm making, boom, 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 boom for half an hour straight. And it's definitely one of these games when even when I lose, I like what I did in my forest. You know what I mean? I like that I have these, 12 tropical birds over my trees, even though you may have crushed me.
Yeah, and I think some of that is likely just how the cost curve is set up and how the cards are set up. So the cost curve is 0 to 3, which means like with that, every card is reasonably cheap. And then you've got no like standout cards that like break the game. And so you have no like standout totem cards that like you build a strategy around, like Race for the Galaxy. It's got these level 6 developments that you kind of build a strategy around. You're like, this is what I'm gonna do, this is what I'm gonna do. If I don't get this, I lose. If I get this, I crush him, right? This game has every card has like one thing on it, maybe 3 things, but they all do something pretty simple. It says this scores with this, or this is this many points, or discard this and you got an extra turn. And it's pretty simple as far as the individual cards, and then the complexity comes from how you add those simplicities together. It's not really it's just additive, and you create this really simple additive web between these systems of cards that depend on each other for points, and it's all growing incrementally rather than being hey, my strategy works because I got this amazing card, or it doesn't because I didn't get this amazing card.
It's amazing that in a game that has this many different cards and that is a pretty simple set collection game, that most cards don't feel alike to me. You know what I mean? They manage to make them mechanically score differently and add little twists and turns here that make the cards feel different, as well as the cards feeling different thematically, of course, and where you're placing them around the tree.
Yeah. And I think I think it helps that none of them score like that much individually. I'd say that the oddest one, the most standout one, is probably the bear and the raccoon, which deal with your cave. And this cave is where you set aside cards. And I've yet to play a heavy cave strategy, but playing out a bear, which will get you all the cards in the meadow, which is probably 13, maybe it's 9 cards plus the 3 that you put out to play the bear is 12 cards. Wow, that's a lot of cards. Or, the raccoon, which says, discard as many cards as you want into your cave to draw up the same number of cards. That sounds like a way to just totally affect the game and the pacing of it and do a rush strategy, which I feel like that could be perhaps the most affecting if you were able to somehow just have enough raccoons where you were able to rush the game.
But again, that requires a very specific card draw.
Correct.
It's probably perfect thematically that as a vegan, I tend to go for the berries and grubs and lizards and the little things under the tree. Tends to, for some reason, be my favorite strategy. I've played them all, but that one I, for some reason, keep getting drawn to.
Yeah, my favorite strategy tends to be get one ability that allows you to draw more cards and then hit it for all that you've got. And get the efficiency of not just gaining points, but also churning out towards the end game and putting the pressure on your opponent to complete their strategy. That's the one that I like.
That can be a good strategy, but it's not the, get the card draw thing and you automatically win. No. Because, then you're going to need the other things that allow you to actually score with what the cards you're drawing are. You know what I mean? If you're playing trees, if you get extra cards and you play trees, well then, if you're not getting a ton of points scoring trees, it's not going to be as beneficial.
Yeah. So do you want to pivot into a conversation about card costs more generally in games, or did you want to talk more about Forest Shuffle?
Well, we'll get to our sort of intertwined topic about card costs, but I just want to get a sense. So it sounds like you really enjoyed this game, maybe not quite as passionately as John and I did, but you were taken with it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm not in love with it, but I do think it's good. It's got that feeling that I love of really difficult decisions. My goodness, I've got so many good cards and so many different ways that I could go, but I don't want to spend any of the damn things, right? But I have to spend them in order to do anything at all. So I have to classify my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th, 10th favorite card in my hand and start playing them out. And then at the same time, I still really like these cards, so I'm going to take some inefficient card draws and delay and get some cruddy cards and play those instead of my good ones. And there's a lot of moments of favoritism that go on and not slaughtering your darlings or when really maybe you should
yeah,
and that's
get rid of that card if it's clogging your hand,
right.
I think the highest compliment that can be paid to this game with me and with other people I've played with is that somebody who loses the game is often just like, let's play again. As soon as right after they get crushed at the game, they don't want to set it aside. They want to get back in there and do better and try a new strategy the next time, which is high praise. And that to me reminds me a little bit of Race for the Galaxy and how people tend not to play the game just once in a row.
Forest Shuffle, not a just once kind of game.
The biggest criticism I have 2 criticisms of the game that I want to just throw out there before we move on. The first is the frivolous criticism is that it's a stupid title. Forest Shuffle.
I like Forest Shuffle.
I feel like there was some committee at Asmodee that just said, okay, we want the first word to be forest. That's really selling well these days. And then they whiteboarded the next word for like 3 days and couldn't come up with anything and just went with shuffle, which somebody had said on the first day.
No, you're shuffling all the cards. It's a big deck. You got to shuffle a lot of it. That's a major component of it.
Yes, I understand why the shuffle, but Forest Shuffle doesn't really fit with Forest now, does it, that much?
No, but you can think of it as a dance, and all of the animals are dancing in synergy to different beats, but somehow through all those syncopated rhythms, you come out with beautiful music, and that's a Forest Shuffle.
I like you should be in marketing. That's all I got to say. Anyway, very minor criticism. The second criticism is this, I'm sure, is improving because I haven't played it in a week or so.
It's better.
But the BGA implementation, when I played it, had some real holes in it, in that The cards didn't always expand when you moused over them. It's hard to see everything. You have to like scroll all over the place to see all the cards. I don't know if they're ever going to make it as nice as a tabletop.
No, it's better. It works well now. The only thing is when you zoom in sometimes all the way, some of the cards will be out of your frame if your laptop screen
it's
isn't
still
that big.
even improved. It may suffer from an out of frame problem, which and being able to see all your cards at once and see the market at once.
It's close to as good as a physical tabletop. It's 80% there, I'd say.
Gotcha. Okay, Forest Shuffle.
My biggest criticism is one of those stupid ones that is actually a compliment. I want more animals and more different types of tags inside of it, and because I want the discovery more. Yeah, I'm sure it'll have an expansion, and I'm sure
I'm sure it will. Yeah. I'm sure it will, and I think we'll both probably buy it. One thing Forest Shuffle really makes you think about is how they determine the cost of the cards in cards, right?
Yeah.
And we talked about some cards being free, other cards being 1 or 2 cards. And obviously, if a card's worth more points, it's going to cost more, or if it has a powerful effect. Sometimes cards have powerful effects like take another turn if you play it with the right currency, and that card's going to be more than just 1 card in cost, right? So it's tricky. I've noticed that games that do this and games that have costs for anything, from what I've read, the designers tend to try to develop formulae to determine, what's a set cost for a card, or how much should a card cost, or a card that costs this much should do this much. It's a very tricky thing. In Forest Shuffle, I think it's astounding how little you say, oh, this card's just weak, or this card's OP. You really don't say that much in this game. So whatever formula they used, they did a good job with.
And I did a little bit of background reading for this because I'm not a designer, so I went to some 12-year-old blog called GameBalanceConcepts.wordpress.com and read a little bit about cost curves. And actually, I think it's worth just diving a little bit into like what a cost curve is and how designers seem to set them and just use some terms. So obviously, you've got costs. Costs are the actual cost of something, usually the money that you have to pay for it, or in this case, the cards. And then costs are everything bad, and then the benefits are everything good, right? Maybe in Magic, it does a lot of damage. Maybe in Forest Shuffle, it's the points plus the ability to take an extra turn. Generally, you might want the costs and benefits to be about equal numerically. Okay. And so this is how somebody might set their system, might set their equation. And while jiggering that equation, they might find that some cards are overpowered or underpowered, and then overcosted versus undercosted. So undercosted, it's too cheap. Overcosted it's too expensive. Underpowered, the level of the benefits is actually what needs to be adjusted. And then overpowered, the level of the benefits must be reduced, right? I think one reason that this game works is nothing really seems underpowered or overpowered, right? The benefits don't really have to be reduced on any of the cards in Forest Shuffle. Nothing really needs to be bumped up too much, because even Butterflies, like we talked about, on its own, kind of a cruddy card, but then in the game system, it can work pretty well because you've got something that buttresses it, specifically like a hedgehog, right? And then you lay out all of these cards, the cost and benefit of each, and then you put them into a line, an ascending line from lowest to greatest with the differential, and then you've got your cost curve, right? And you say something is either above the curve or below the curve, right? Then you can say, okay, this is an expanding cost curve, and the things at the top will be, maybe they'll be a little overpowered, then the things at the bottom will be underpowered, right? And then it allows you to kind of discover what the more powerful or less powerful cards actually end up being. And the way that this might translate in specific games is, take Ark Nova, for example. So I watched a video recently, thanks to somebody that posted it on the Discord, and somebody actually discovered the cost curve equation set for Ark Nova. So if anybody's familiar with Ark Nova, you know that you've got appeal, which is the number of points in the game. Each appeal is worth 3 money. And then there's also the money for the actual territory that you have to put out in order to play that animal. And then there are tags, and each additional tag is also an additional cost. I think it's like +4. And then everything that is required in order to play that card is a -4 on cost. Let's say you need to upgrade your animal card to level 2 in order to play this card. Okay, then that has a -4 to the cost. And they discovered through working out this math that every single card in the game is within one of that specific equation. The one example being the moose. It actually is 2 cost over, but it kind of gets around it because it's a flock animal and can join into a pen with another animal that's already down, thereby kind of reducing its cost, right? But where it gets kind of fudgy is how the specific powers on the cards are actually costed out. A lot of them are basically like the same cost, but I would say that like snapping might be more powerful than just like an ability to get 1, 2, or 3 more coins, right? And if they're balanced the same way, then okay, you get kind of screwy, and maybe the equation is messed up, which I want to get into because I know you have some points about games where the equation seems messed up. But it's interesting because reading through this, I was like, yeah, all that makes sense because I've played this game, I don't know, 250 times now on BGA, and it makes total sense that intuitively I know what like the price should be, and I know when something feels overpriced. Like I will not buy an elephant unless I have the reduction in cost, the associated tag, because I feel that it's overcosted by like 5 money without the tag that reduces its cost to the appropriate cost. And I can feel that just looking at it. So it's interesting how these costs actually play out, and it makes you realize inherently after you played a big game like Ark Nova a bunch of times, it gives you an actual mathematical reasoning behind what you feel while you're playing the game. And that game feels so balanced. And I think that that's one of the things that makes the game so desirable, is that every card feels so balanced, but then it's not a game where the cards seem to balance each other, right? It's each card feels balanced individually instead of like, and has this kind of scintillating ability to it, but each card kind of has the same scintillating ability across all of them. No card really feels like necessarily a standout. Some do, like a rhino does, I'd say, but then the cards don't necessarily work in concert with one another like you might find in like a Race for the Galaxy. And I feel like that's a whole different kind of card balancing equation, right?
Yeah, it's a harder card balancing equation. And I wouldn't argue with you about Ark Nova because you played it so much more than I have and know the cards so much better. But I am skeptical about costing formulas. And to be clear, I think it's a great exercise for designers to do this, to get themselves in the ballpark of what a card is worth rather than just, guesstimating and making it up for every card. But it's so easy for designers to effectively be off on certain aspects of the game, if only for the reason that I mentioned before, is that a great designer is not necessarily a great player of the game. So it depends how good a job was done in development with that formula, and are they willing to alter the cost of the card from the formula when they see something that sort of breaks the formula. And certain things can break card costing or piece costing formulas. Synergies will break a formula, right? If something is worth X in isolation but gets multiplied in its value when combined with something else. I used to play this collectible miniatures game that had 2 powerful abilities that were okay on their own, but combined they were like 5 times as powerful as anything in the game, and the cost just reflected them in isolation. Or if a card can do 5 different things, but you're going to only do one of them with that card, right? But you're paying for all 5 things, it's like that's what I would call anti-synergy. And that card can be overcosted if it's merely a formula's going through a checklist and making you pay for each of its abilities, right? So you have to kind of do play testing and common sense on top of your formula and realize your formula is never going to be perfect unless your game is super simple. Here's another thing. The other thing that really needs to be taken into account when you're determining costs and formula is how people get the cards in the first place. And this is really essential. In a game where it's very random and everyone will have an equal shot at cards, like in a card drafting game, you can have some cards just be kind of weak and weaker, just flat weaker than others, and just know they'll be taken at the end of the draft.
Because they'll self-balance for them in the draft.
And the draft will actually sort of balance that out. Eric Lang intentionally made some of the cards you draft weaker and stronger than others in Blood Rage, right? You have a combat card that's a +5. Another one in the same draft is a +3, right? It wasn't like he's stupid and doesn't know that 5 is higher than 3. He just says 3 is going to be drafted later, right? But
if
that
no
only
plus
works.
5 comes out, then the plus 3 has to be weighed against the value of the Loki strategy card, let's say. And maybe they're about the same to somebody who's drafting them.
No, the plus 5's always going to be
No. But maybe
3.
plus 3 versus Loki strategy. I'm saying if the plus 5 and the plus 3 don't come out together, then...
Well, maybe, but the point is it's because it's an egalitarian distribution of cards in the card drafting system in Blood Rage. You can do that. You couldn't do that in other games, right? In a game where you construct what you start with, like a game like Magic or a collectible miniatures game where you're building an army or constructing a deck, that's where the costing gets really hard because players are looking to break everything you've done and can very intentionally do so because it's not like they have to wait for a card to come up randomly. No, that card's going in their deck. So if you've made mistakes in your costing formula, this is why Magic the Gathering might have the best game designers in the world in terms of people who understand these things and the value of different cards. But because combos are so hard to predict in a card pool and how everything bounces off each other and interacts with each other, they will invariably make mistakes which somebody will broke, and that will be the key deck. And that fits with the game design and marketing strategies. They're just going to roll that over in 6 months or a year because they realize they can't hold the balance for longer.
They want that excitement of the possibility of breaking.
Figure out how to break it. And they may even have things that are intentionally a little off that very subtly, seeing if people will figure it out. But, that's a game which is designed to roll over every 6 months, after people have figured it out. So that's a game where you have full control as, it's kind of the opposite of Blood Rage. So how the cards come out also determines how precise you need to be in your costing of things, costing of cards.
I'll go back to Race for the Galaxy, which demonstrates some of that. I mean, there's some cards in there that potentially could always be good. In one of the expansions, there's a card that allows you to put out 2 worlds instead of 1, and it's cheap. It's not that expensive. It's incredibly powerful, and it can rush the end game. The thing is, there's not that many of them in the deck, so it's hard to find. It doesn't come out into every single game, and it's interesting. You actually get players who still feel that it is overpowered, and its benefits are just too powerful for what it is, and you can't just make it more expensive. They just won't play it at all because they feel that it shouldn't be in the game. And I've been one of those before. But then there's other cards that for a given strategy, if you have a bunch of blue worlds already, well, the blue development will be absolutely wonderful. But if you have a bunch of green worlds, then the level 6 blue development is worth nothing to you. It's only beneficial given those relationships already exist. Right. And if you don't have those relationships out there, then it means nothing. So it's interesting. I was looking for, how Tom Lehman balanced that game. And I feel like he maybe didn't balance the cost of cards based off of necessarily an equation so much as he relied on balancing the decks as a whole. And maybe he just did a ton of play testing in order to get that balanced.
Exactly. That's how I think you have to do it. When you said the word expansions, that just opened the floodgates there, because when you design a set and you balance everything, you aren't balancing in anticipation of what's going to be an expansion.
Right.
And then the expansion may make a card which was just innocuous into something super powerful. If you have an expansion which focuses on military, all of a sudden those military cards, which got bolstered by other military cards, become far more powerful because there's more military cards that are bolstering them. Now, I'm not saying that as a Race for the Galaxy example. I'm just saying that as kind of a general example of how things can spike, and it's why Magic sets can't be combined with each other in a balanced way, because they're not. You just can't balance a big ecosystem against one that's coming later that you can't predict.
Well, it's interesting because the Ark Nova expansion that's coming out, Ark Nova Marine, it seems to tend more towards this interaction between card balancing. And that seems to be the designer's mantra behind it, I would say, because, for example, there's now reef cards that come out, and for every reef card that you play, you will reactivate all of the previous reef cards, and you'll get the associated benefits. So sure, like 1 itself might be not that good, and then 2 might be okay, balanced and good, the right level, right? But then 3, 4, 5, 6, you're getting into overpowered territory. There's no way to put a cost too high on that card, because all of those cards individually are relatively cheap, but then altogether they're extremely powerful. I think that they introduced another way to balance that, which is that you have to build next to a coral reef, and so you can only put so many out, or it's difficult to put them out. But it's interesting because it seems like the designer has decided to, let's get away from balancing individual cards. Let's get into balancing across a card ecosystem for the expansion. And that creates really exciting turns and really exciting opportunities that don't always feel fair.
Part of my thing is not so much that I want to say I'm skeptical of formula, although I am. It's just that true balance is impossible is really more my thesis.
Sure.
And another point I want to emphasize is coming back to something we talked about in Forest Shuffle, which is player count alters these balance equations dramatically. A card that's great in 2-player is terrible in 5-player. Right? And how do you balance that? Because you don't know what player count people are going to be playing at. Like those chestnut trees are worth like a factorial 1, 3, 6, 10, 15, 21, 28 points, right?
That's great.
And so they're not worth much. They're a very bad deal if you only get a couple, but a great deal if you get a ton of them. Well, your best chance of getting a ton of them is in a low player count game when you can corner the market on those cards, right? And so there's cards like that in every game, which just work great at a low player count or work great at a high player count. And you just can't, what are you going to do, right? You want your game to be accessible at different player counts.
Right. Well, I was thinking about that with the Bears last night, because Bears, you kind of want to wait for the market, the Meadow, to be totally full of cards, and that's when you play your bear trap, and that's when you get all of those cards into your cave, right? And you can do that at 2 players and even throttle the number of cards individually on your turn that are in the Meadow. But at 4 or 5 players, you're never going to be able to play that bear at the correct time, because you're never going to know when the Meadow is going to be flush or not. It's just going to be rolling and resetting all the time, and it's just going to be complete happenstance whether it happens to be full on your turn or not when you have that bear card in your hand.
Although I feel like it's better if you can play the bear at a high player count, because you'll probably be removing more lucrative cards. Whereas if you're in a 2-player game that's built up to like 10 cards, it's probably cards that people, the other player, you know what I mean? It's less.
It makes
you don't
it
allow
more,
a really good card to sit in there at 10 cards.
Right. It just makes it more opportunistic than able to plan it. And there might be a really good opportunity.
As a feature of higher player count games,
right.
They tend to be more tactical, whereas 2 players with less obstacles, you can make more of a long-term plan. That's, I think, true across the board in any game.
Sure. But yeah, I think it changes the relative effects of an individual card's power quite a lot.
Well, we could go on with this and cite examples, but we'd love to hear from you about what games you think really nail the balance of card costing, or really are fun but fail miserably in having broken cards and broken things all over the place because of a bad formula or bad design decisions.
Yeah. Tyrants of the Underdark, does it have a good formula? Earth, does it have a good formula? Let us know. We'd love to know what you think.
Tyrants, pretty good, but there's definitely some cards better than others.
And I'm sure that there's some decks that are like absolutely hog wild as far as interactions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, please let us know. We're at TwoWoodForAWheat@gmail.com. Shoot us a message. Actually, best way to reach us would be to join our Discord. It's in the show notes. Check out Tony's blog. He's at Max Longstreet, The Secrets of Great Games on Board Game Geek. Next episode, I believe that we both got our AEG boxes full of Fit to Print and Point City and Deep Dive, and I'm sure we'll either have a double or perhaps triple feature depending on how these next 2 weeks go, but get excited for that.
Or depending on what we play in New Jersey, maybe I'll see if I can audible you into Federation. Who knows? Things can always change.
That's true. It's a big deck. We have a lot of games out there, and depending on what comes into our grubby little hands, we might want to shift the value of what comes out into play.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next time. Again, check us out on the Discord. We'd love to play some games with you on Board Game Arena or in Pat's case on
TTS.
TTS, as he likes to call it,
Come-
or even live if you happen to be in Chicago or New Jersey.
Come at me for some Nucleum. Thanks, folks. Stay frosty.
Take it easy.
Two Wood for a Wheat is recorded across the airwaves
In Bear Creek, Pennsylvania,
and Chicago, Illinois. We're produced by Tony Faber and edited by Patrick Flannery. Follow us on Instagram at TWFAW and find more episodes and blog posts at TwoWoodForAWheat.com.
did you notice that my shirt came off during the recording?
Your shirt came off.
Just flew right off.
I did not, because my screensaver came up. So I was actually closed my eyes during the last 20 minutes of the recording.
As you should.
Because I am not going to look at your nipples, goddammit.
They're actually just out of frame. They're
Okay,
they're titillatingly close to the frame.
I'm glad that screensaver arrived.
It's hot. It's hot in Chicago. What can I say?